Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our last meeting of the year. Could I welcome everyone to today's plans meeting? My name is Councillor Eileen Taylor, and I will be chairing today's meeting. Could I remind everyone that today's meeting is being live streamed on Leeds City Council YouTube channel so that the public can observe the meeting without needing to be present. South and West Plan panel deals with application from the south, northwest, and west of the city. The aim of the plan is to hear all the relevant information from applicants, members of the public, and council officers to help members of the panel make their decisions. Could I now invite members and officers to introduce themselves? Could you please mute your mic after you're finished? Could I start from my left?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Steve Littlejohn. I'm the planning case officer.
Hello, I'm John Booth, Principal Engineer Highways.
Good afternoon, Councillor Sharon Hamilton, representing Meanwood and Moortown Ward.
Good afternoon, I'm Councillor David Jenkins and I represent Kennebec and Seacroft Ward and I'm a substitute.
Councillor John Garvani, Horsforth Ward.
And good afternoon, everybody. Councillor Neil Walsh, Headingley and Hyde Park Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Al Garthwaite, Headingley and Hyde Park Ward, and I'm substituting today.
Good afternoon, Daniel Lameth, Player Unit Plans Panel Team.
Season's greetings, I'm Robert Finnegan, I'm a Morley North councillor.
Merry Christmas, everyone. Councillor Colin Campbell.
Good afternoon, everyone. Trish Smith, and I represent Putty Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Barry Anderson, Adlin Wharfdale Ward.
Hi everyone, Natasha Prosser, Clerk to the panel.
Hello everyone, Nikki Dio, Legal Advisor to the panel today.
Good afternoon, Jonathan Carr, Head of Development Management.
Steve Butler, Group Manager for South and West and Lead Officer, Lead Officer for South and West Plans Panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Jenkins and Councillor Algateway, and also to the member of the public that's in the audience. You're welcome. Thank you. Could I move on to agenda 5?
Thanks, Chair. Agenda item 1, there's no appeals against refusal of inspection of documents. Agenda item 2, there's no items which require the exclusion of the press and the public. Agenda item 3, I'm not aware of any formal late items. Agenda item 4, can members declare any interest? Nope. And agenda item 5, apologies from Councillors Reagan and Bowden, and we have Jenkins and Councillor Garthwaite here today to substitute.
Thank you. Could we now move on to item 6, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 24th of November. I wasn't at this meeting, so I'm relying on members who was present to give the green light. That is all accurate. I did read the report, but I'm going on your words. So does members support me? Thank you.
Councillor Calvin.
Sorry?
Will usually be opposed and accept the minutes.
So it was Councillor Walsh and second by Councillor Giovanni. Thank you. We will now move on to item. Sorry, is any matters arising from the minutes? No, I take it everyone's happy with the minutes. Okay, thank you. I've just noticed Councillor Eswood walked in. Councillor Eswood, welcome. Could you introduce yourself, please?
Chair, could I just interrupt for one moment? It seems that we've got more members than we would normally have allocated to this committee.
Have we we have two members. Apologies. So I
Is that
take
correct?
it,
I've just been advised by the clerk
I
that
take it. Sorry,
Sorry, Councillor Garthwaite, who are you here substituting for?
we've got councillor.
Councillor Bowden?
okay, that's fine. Thank you. It was just the clerk was slightly confused. I apologise. Have you got your card, Councillor Hasselworth, to speak? We'll arrange for that now. Thank you.
Councillor Heselwood, Bramley and Stanley Ward.
Thank you. Yeah, we have two members short and we have two subs, so that's just the balance. I'm sure members don't want to come in at Christmas extra. Yeah, thank you. We'll now move on to item 7, Land of Awkward Query, Adelaide. Could I now ask the officers to present this application?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So the proposal we have today is for filter press, which is a type of fixed plant at Hawksworth Quarry. Just to update members before I start, we have received an email after the report was issued, which comments on the report. The matters raised were dealt with in the report and will be reiterated over the course of the presentation. But for further clarity, I have added some extra slides to help to provide a little bit more context. So Hawksworth Quarry is an operational quarry located in the green belt to the north of Hawksworth village. Hawksworth Main Street runs parallel to the south at around 150 metres. Site's accessed by Udder Lane to the west, with residential dwellings to the south and west. Due to the constricted nature of Hawksworth Main Street, HGV movements are limited to 220 a week. This limit is currently being breached and enforcement action remains ongoing. The quarry currently operates under 3 permissions covering different areas, and the proposed filter press would be located within the area approved in 1996. This permission replaced, under legislation relevant at that time, an older permission from 1954. This is ultimately the permission which defines the boundaries for this part of the quarry. This is relevant insofar as this plan produced in 2006 for an extension to the east of the quarry has been seen by many people as being a definitive red line boundary for the older part of the quarry. The plan shows the existing site layout at the time and is incorrect. This has caused quite a lot of confusion, and it's the main reason why an application has been called in, as the proposed plan is to be located in the contented area. However, it should be noted that this plan doesn't retrospectively change the original red line permission. However, an operational plan submitted for the 96 permission does show that there was no intention to extract within the contended area. In 2016, a further permission was granted for an area to the north of the quarry, and this plan submitted with that application shows the contended area to the south as having been extracted in 2013. Aerial photographs show the extraction to have taken place between September 2011 and July 2013. This plan was added to the plan schedule at the time, effectively removing any chance of enforcement action being taken regarding the breach of the earlier operational plan. It was considered by officers that as the proposed location of the filter press was to be in this contended area, It should be dealt with as a full application rather than as a matter which could be approved in writing under condition 19 of the 96 permission, which allows fixed plan, which would otherwise be considered to be permitted development, to be dealt with in this way. The existing sand wash plant located further within the quarry was approved under this process. The sand wash is currently supplied by water imported by truck and stored in a large lagoon, seen here directly to the north of the wash plant. Lagoons aren't considered to be the best option, hence the need for a filter press, which includes storage tanks and recycles the water used by the wash plant. The proposed structure consists of an elevated shed which houses the press and associated gantries and storage tanks. The structure also includes concrete storage bays which have already been constructed, and it will be connected to pipes to the sand wash plant nearby. This is the concrete bays constructed, which makes the application part retrospective as outlined in the report. And it's possible to see how the finished housing would sit on top of that. Although in this case, the shed would be finished in a dark green colour and would sit on the side of the overall construction furthest away from the boundary, rather than next to it as shown here. Here we see the rear of the structure and its relationship to the land behind, which currently consists of stockpiled material. This material is to be removed and a retaining wall placed next to the bay. With the area to be backfilled and a raised landscaped area to be provided to the boundary. There are still some details about the planting scheme and the height and nature of the soil bund and overall timeframes to be finalised, and this can be worked through with a condition requiring further details to be submitted. In general terms, the planting will consist of gorse, shrubs and trees. Here we can see the sand wash plant, which the filter press would service. And this shows the relationship with the lagoon, which currently feeds the wash plant. As we move out of the operation area, we can see operations take place below the line of the adjacent land. And this shows the view into the quarry from the footpath, which runs adjacent to the east. This is walking along that footpath from south to north with a bund screening views into the quarry. Having said that, the filter press would sit above the line of the adjacent land by around 5 metres, although it will be set back from the edge, and it's a question of interpretation at this point as to how visible the structure will be from public viewpoints. This is taken from Main Street, looking directly up at the application site. This was taken last week, so it's a winter photo, and it's not likely that the structure will be seen from the village. This is taken from Baildon Road, travelling south out of the village, and the red line shows where the filter press would be. The plans show that the top of the structure would be around 9.3 metres below the line of the electricity wires, and telegraph poles are usually 9 metres in height. So even if a sliver were to be seen, if it was in a dark green colour, it wouldn't be a significant feature in the landscape. This is an older image taken from Baildon Moor, also taken during the winter. I did go out there and took the same photo, but it was a misty day, so I had to resort to an earlier photo. It has to be taken into account that this is a zoomed image, but it does show the profile of the land between the quarry and the residences to the south. This is the unzoomed image taken from the same spot. Again, a strip from the top of the structure may be seen, but it would have to be through binoculars, and it's unlikely. And it would be a very low impact visually. Views from other sides would not show anything because the structure would be screened by the existing topography. So we have east, views from the north and from the west. And the plant would be below the line of the ridge there. So just to conclude, I would reiterate that the application does include the removal of the lagoon and any HGV trips created by exportation of filter cake would have to be included within the overall number of approved trips. The Environment Agency have stated that such exportation may well require a permit, so the material may have to stay within the quarry as fill material if no permit were to be issued. It's noted there is an issue with excessive traffic movements through the village, and this is being dealt with as an enforcement matter. From a planning application viewpoint, however, members will be aware that we can't refuse an application on the basis that we think a condition will be breached. And in this case, the proposed traffic numbers would be so low as not to make a significant difference. With regard to noise, Environmental Health have looked at the noise report and have concluded that a condition would be sufficient to ensure noise levels were as described in the report, which demonstrate that the press itself, being within a building of its own, is a low impact operation in terms of noise at sensitive properties. On the whole, it's considered by officers that the application is acceptable in policy terms, and a recommendation for approvals made, subject to the finalisation of conditions. And
Sorry, thank you. In accordance with our protocol for public speaking at Plans panel, members of the public are in attendance to speak to the panel. After they have spoken, I'll invite members of the panel to ask questions to the speakers to clarify matters of facts, and those questions should be limited to relevant planning issue. I will then invite officers to clarify any matters arise and to point out any consideration raised in the discussion, but which are not material to determine the application. Today, I have two speakers, one against and one for. I'll now call on the objection, who's here to object, and it is Mr. Allison. If you could please sit down at the top of the table. Thank you. You've got 4 minutes to address us.
My name is Dr. Alderson. I am a resident of Hawksworth. I am a GP. I also hold qualifications in forestry, geology, and ecology. I'm speaking today on behalf of myself, other objectors, and all the members of the Hawksworth Quarry Monitoring Group. Our 50 or so members live all around the Odder Greenbelt area and actively monitor the commercial activities of the owner and operator of the quarry. The group's aim is not to close or hinder the lawful running of the quarry. We do, however, expect it to be run in accordance with existing planning conditions and with respect for the amenity of the area and the daily lives of residents. We do not object in principle to the installation and use of a filter press in the processing of native material for use at the quarry. We do object to its current location. We do object to any proposed increase in the operational hours of the quarry for any reason. The minerals team and planners were alerted to the ongoing construction of the filter press on the 26th of June this year, prior to the planning application having been validated by the payment of the application fee. If prompt, effective action had been taken at that time, the present standoff between the operator and the residents could have been avoided by finding a more suitable location lower in the bed of the quarry and further from the boundary. Extending the operating hours of the quarry to accommodate the workings of the filter press is unacceptable. The operating hours are well established. Purchasing equipment which cannot perform its function within the established time framework would seem at best to be an error of judgment. It does not seem reasonable to us to site machinery close to residential properties and gardens without taking adequate steps to shield residents from the sight and sound of this equipment, especially when the machinery and material is readily available on site to do so. Residents would take little interest in the workings of the quarry if those workings did not impinge negatively upon their daily lives. At a recent meeting attended by all our councillors, the quarry owner stated that the negative effects of the quarry on our community were his retribution, his words, not mine, against those who objected to these house building plans 40 years ago. Only 3 of our group members actually lived in the area at that time. The quarry owner is waging a war against a long dead enemy. Residents do not deserve to be treated in this way. The filter press building has been constructed without planning permission in a highly unsuitable position. It partly stands on land which breaches the operational boundary of the quarry. It is intended to replace lagoons which were built without planning consent and without adequate regard for health and safety rules. But we have to find a way to move forward in a more positive light. The infractions detailed here may be overlooked by the community if the owner and operator agree to manage the quarry as a quarry with respect for the local community and within the stated conditions. In a reciprocal spirit of goodwill, we expect the whole community to be shielded from the sight and sound of quarrying activities, including the filter press. This means increasing the height of the boundary landforms to provide 100% shielding, planting them with trees and undertaking to never excavate them again further during the working life of the quarry. Any increase in operating intensity or hours of operation would not be appropriate in this greenbelt area and will be vigorously resisted. We are hopeful that the suggested measures will greatly reduce the need for local residents to raise concerns about activities at the quarry and would recommend that they form part of the conditions of approval if the filter press is granted planning permission, and a full list will be provided in writing. In addition, the Hawksworth Quarry monitoring team would be happy to consider working with the operator, Mr. Whitelock, and the minerals team to the benefit of the community and the quarry in future.
Thank you. Are there any questions from members to Mr. Yeah, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Did I hear you correct, sir? You said that this had been built outside of the boundary.
Yeah, so in Mr. Littlejohn's presentation, he showed you various plans. There are other plans available, and actually the plans which were available on the planning portal during the period between 2006 and 2015, and I have copies here if you'd like to see them, show quite clearly the red line operating boundary follows the line of the power poles that go up the southern boundary of the quarry. Now, whether these are true or false really is irrelevant, because they were published on the Leeds planning portal, which is a public access forum, if you like, where people can actually check what's going on in their local area when they buy their property. All the people who live adjacent to the quarry, coincidentally, I suppose, all purchased their property in that period of time, and they were the plans which were active at that time. The boundary was breached in 2013. I actually saw it happen. Multiple walls were knocked down, and I actually contacted the owner of the quarry at the time to find out what was going on and to see whether things would be repaired. I didn't find him helpful. I later contacted the minerals team, and I didn't find them very helpful either, because basically they said because they hadn't noticed it at the time, and because they had accepted another plan which was submitted by the quarry owner or operator, subsequent to the breach happening, this somehow made it okay and it had to be disregarded. Now, I don't know the legality of that. I honestly don't. But all I can say is if Leeds planners are going to publish documents on their website for people to access and make decisions about purchasing property in the area when things have been flagged up on searches during that purchase, then those documents should be accurate. And if they're not accurate, then I would suggest that either the Leeds planners or the Leeds Council themselves or the person who omitted to notice the mistake in the first place is somehow liable. And I'm not suggesting that people don't make mistakes, because people do make mistakes, but it's the responsibility of that person or that organisation to put that right. If I do something wrong in my job, I'm taken to task by the GMC, and quite rightly so. If the council make a mistake or the planners make a mistake or the minerals team make a mistake, it is unfortunate, and I am absolutely certain it's not malicious. However, to leave it unfixed is malicious, because it's not solving the problem, it's not going to go away, and it is blatantly unfair.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Anderson. Thank you. Can I now call on John Colton to present his support of the application?
Thank you, Chair, and members of the Planning Committee, for allowing me to speak this afternoon regarding this application for the erection of a filter press, which complements the sand plant that has been previously approved. First of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Littlejohn for his comprehensive report on the erection of the filter press and why it is required. Little bit of background: filter press actually is, as I say, complements the sand washing plant that takes the fines material that's crushed from the quarry and doesn't produce additional material. It actually upgrades that material to sand and gritstone, and the very, very fine particles, which are clay, are then suspended in water. They go to the filter press, and the filter press actually then squeezes the clay and the water and recovers the water and sends that back to the sand plant. Therefore, the lagoons that are there will no longer be required. The lagoons were placed there on a short-term basis whilst the filter press, the sand plant was erected, commissioned, and then the follow-on was to have the filter press erected soon after. But as we know, over the last 2 or 3 years, things have been quite challenging. So trying to get things ordered and built and supply lines have made it a little bit difficult. I'd like to address the point regarding the red lines on the plans. This planning permit, the planning permission for this quarry was granted in 1954, and the records show that the quarry actually was used to build the village in the 1880s. The boundary is quite clear, as Mr. Littlejohn has placed within his report, that the 1954 plan that was approved under the 1996 plan shows the red line to the boundaries of the site, that they are the dry stone walls that exist within the quarry. The 1996, the plan shown on in 2009 that Mr. Alderson and Dr. Alderson refers to is a plan that was produced for the extension to the quarry in 2006, which was granted in 2009. The reason the red line shows it running in a diagonal is because it runs along the edge of a power line, which is an 11,000 volt power line that's been supposed to be moved by the Northern Power Grid for the last 15 years. And then we were in the process of negotiating with them with working the stone under the power line when they moved it under the planning permission that was granted in 1996. The filter press itself, as all the noise reports and impact assessments have been undertaken, and it will not be working outside the times that are allowed for the processing of material. For instance, the saw shed, if the doors are closed or it's inside a building, the planning permission allows operations to continue until the end of their cycle, which is different to the operations of the quarry outside in the general environment. And that condition is there to protect the residents and other stakeholders. So basically, the filter press will operate within the approved hours of the site. I'm happy to take questions as well if you wish.
Thank you. Are there any questions to Councillor Finnegan first?
According to the papers in front of us, there are 8 breaches in the past and 4 ongoing breaches of conditions that have been placed on you. How can we have any faith that we agree this today that you will comply with any of the conditions that we are inclined to impose at that particular point?
Well, first of all, what you will see is that there are, as you quite rightly point out, there are 5 live cases at this present time, and then there have been a number of closed cases. The increases in traffic movements to and from the quarry on the first one, on a Good Friday and Bank Holiday Monday, if I remember rightly, that was to take down a large office block that had been built on the site and replace it with a new one. And the only time that could be done was over the weekend when the staff obviously weren't at work. So that building was actually broken up and placed into the back of wagons and taken away to the operator, Mr. Whitelock's other operation in Skipton, and a new office block built, which is now a shipping container that sits on blocks. That was that. He may well have not conveyed that to the planning authority at the time that would happen over that weekend, which is probably what should have happened. I'm not sure that investigations are going on about that, but I think that was the one for the working over at Easter Monday and Good Friday and Bank Holiday Monday. Non-compliance with condition 8 regarding HGV total trips under approval 1504550. Both applications, the one to the east was granted in 2009 and the one to the north, which is the 150455, have a traffic limit of 110 movements in and out per week. This quarry has never gone over the average of that for the whole of the year. There are times, and we'll admit that.
Can I just interrupt? I think the question was quite clear, not about what the panel can do for assurances with compliance of conditions. I don't think it warrants what says live enforcement action ongoing for there to be a dialogue. So with respect, if we could just respond to the question of the member, I'd be grateful. Thank you.
Well, what I was doing was actually going through the live ones, because what the situation is that there is taking away the traffic movement ones, then the other ones, it's an interpretation of the planning permissions and the conditions that exist on site, and basically
most of those have been dealt with, and most of them have been closed. So all I can say is that most of the planning conditions, as Mr. Littlejohn has referred to in his report, are complied with and dealt with in a fairly, well, actually quite rapidly, because the enforcement officer, the minerals team and ourselves are always discussing matters to try and get these issues sorted out. We do have a planning liaison committee meeting set up with the quarry, but as the other speaker has alluded to at the time, the quarry owner attended that meeting a few weeks ago, and it was quite hostile. So it's, you know, we are trying to repair that situation. But as I say, most of the conditions are complied with.
Councillor Anderson.
Sorry, thank you. I'm fascinated by the reply, but I'm happy for other colleagues to reflect or ask further questions. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
It's a couple of questions. One is on page, well, let's see, on page 17 of our papers, or page 5 of agenda item 7, paragraph 5, under history of negotiations. There is no mention of this, but did any pre-application discussions take place? And since the enforcement came to pass, have you had any discussions with officers as to what may or may not be acceptable in terms of moving forward? So that's the first one. Any pre-application discussions prior to the enforcement action, because you must have known you needed to do it. And since the enforcement action was taken, what discussions have you had with officers as to what may or may not be acceptable? And then the final question is there going to be a new product being produced that could be sold or not? Because in one of the bits of the evidence here, there is a point raised that new product is being built, developed, output, call it whatever you like. Is that in fact the case, that there will be a new product that you could market or not?
If I've got it correct. The history of the negotiations are regarding this filter press. There are no negotiations regarding this application in relation to any enforcement notice, right? As far as I'm aware, there aren't. Negotiations have been taking place with the planning department on the filter press for the last 18 months, right? Some plans were submitted in May 2021 after the sand plant was granted planning, was approved, well, not approved, was the position of where the sand plant is was agreed under condition 19 of the 1996 planning permission. So we thought that the filter press, which is a lot smaller piece of plant, could be granted also under permitted development rights. So there was negotiations with the officers in the minerals team about where the filter press was going to be, how large it was going to be, and what it would do. Right. Those negotiations took over 12 months. And at the end of the day, we didn't reach, I wouldn't say we reached an impasse, but what we did is we'd taken advice, and as far as we were concerned, it was permitted development, because it wasn't 1,000 square meters in area, and it wasn't 15 meters high, and it didn't change the outer appearance of the quarry. There was there's a difference of opinion between the minerals team and ourselves. So what we did is we agreed that we would put an application in so that the council and the minerals officer could deal with all those issues that had been raised by other stakeholders who live near the quarry. So that is what we have done. So there are no enforcement issues in relation to this particular application. Coming to the point regarding enforcement, there is some issues at this present time about the amount of vehicles that have been coming to the site and leaving, right? Some of them are carrying aggregate and some of them have been carrying water. And the amount of water that is being required, which will be replaced by this filter press, that's what's probably tipped the traffic limits over and above what is normally required, right? So that is ongoing and there's some discussions there about traffic limits and the amount of traffic. To answer your third question, what the filter press does is it takes all the minus 250 micron material out of the material that's been washed. So it doesn't make the filter press doesn't make a new product, the sand plant does. The sand plant actually makes building sand for paving, mortar, pipe bedding, all the things that are needed to build houses. And then there's a coarser sand, which is a grit sand, which is usually used in, again, as a filler in concrete. It's used for horticultural sand, sports field sand, and is basically is a more coarse. It can be used for water filtration, for instance. So that's what the sand plant does. The water then that goes from the sand plant to the filter press contains material which is fine, very fine. And that is then pressed and it reduces the water content from something like 70% to 28%. And that material is a clay, it's a cake, it's a gritty clay. Now, most of that material is going to be used on site as subsoil, or it'll be used as bare substrate so that the actual plants that have an affinity for this quarry, which is heather, gorse, broom, have got the same sort of soil material. But there is a small market for this type of clay because, one, it's a sandy clay and it's great, it's consistent. So that material, some of it may go off site if there is a market for it, and it's used for animal bedding. It's used for a supplement to mainly beef cattle, but other ruminants as well. So, but the filter press is not being built to make a new product. The filter press is to be able to recycle water, which currently is 25 cubic meters a day. And this filter press will reduce the demand down to a cubic meter per day because the rest of it will be recycled. And it also makes the material that's in the cake handleable. We don't have to have long residence times in a lagoon, which me, to be quite honest with you, as a geotechnical engineer as well, I have some concerns about lagoons. I always have done. So I hope I've answered your question, sir.
Right. So there is a potential of a market available for the one of the byproducts of the process. Will that, in overall terms, increase traffic movements? Because you said that by the fact that you're not going to need as much water on site, so that will reduce down the number of traffic movements. Fine, I get that. Will there be a corresponding increase in traffic movements by moving that product on and off site? And what's going to be the general balance at the end of the day, more or less?
Right. First of all, the planning permissions from 1996 allows 50,000 tonnes a year or 1,000 tonnes a week, right? Unless you wish to discuss with the council about how many vehicles you need, right? So it's unlimited, really. when one reads that. The other two have a limit of 110 out and 110 in. Now, those limits are the limits at this present time. You know, so it doesn't matter whether you, and those limits are interpreted on a quarrying permission as allowing as the material as allowing aggregate or any other minerals out of the gate. So the limit is 110. So if they wanted to sell 40,000 tons of clay from this filter press, it would still have to be within those limits of the quarry. I think the little bit of the difference of opinion on traffic limits is that nobody envisaged at the time that a tanker would be coming with water. Now there are additional traffic limits, but they are additional traffic movements, but they are not aggregate movements. So that's why there probably is some ongoing investigations. What I can say is any materials that leave that site will be within the limits of the planning permissions, which are 110. Okay.
Because I think Steve just want to clarify a point on yours.
Chair, because that answer was a lot longer than the questions. I was a little bit concerned that members might not actually be following it. So the three basic questions were, and Steve can correct me because he knows this much better than I, that were any pre-app discussions prior to enforcement action? Well, this started in effect because there was a bit of a difference of opinion about how a condition was worded on a previous permission. So the applicant went ahead thinking it was permitted development. We thought it wasn't, so there were no pre-application discussions. The concrete walls you saw in the photographs were erected before we became involved on this particular issue. Since enforcement action and discussions, well, Steve's obviously been involved with months of discussions about this and the bunds and all the rest of it and its exact location, the impact and the noise. So that's the answer to that one. And the new product, I think, was quite clear in the end that potentially there will be a market for some of this filter cake. I just wanted to make it clear because there were quite simple questions, but it was quite a long answer in terms of response. And then on the highways issue, yes, there is a bit of a difference of opinion about the vehicle movements because of the previous conditions. And we heard about aggregate movements and the movement of water by trucks. The simple matter of fact that the 220 movements, 110 in, 110 out, is the limit by the condition in which they have to adhere to. So from our opinion, whether it be aggregates, water or anything else, if it's in a truck, it has to be within those limits.
Councillor Walsh.
Thanks, Chair. You'll have to excuse my sultry jazz singing tones this afternoon. Yeah. So we heard from Dr. Alderson, Chair, and that gentleman seemed, and his friends and neighbours seem to be in a fairly reasonable frame of mind, I think. And seem to be looking to find an equitable solution, shall we say, to where we find ourselves. And discussions so far this afternoon have uncovered a fair amount of planning form, shall we say, with regard to this quarry. But we are. So in the interest of being positive and looking forward, this is going to put you slightly on the spot, so forgive me, but what would you say is an equitable solution that would, if you like, meet residents halfway, meet what the planning authority requires and meet your operations?
Well, what we would like to do is reinstate the liaison committee meetings, which we used to run on a regular basis up until COVID, and then they were cancelled, and there's been a number of people who were on that committee who no longer want to be or can't be or have other things to do. That's the first thing. We'd like to reinstate that. The second thing is Mr. Ogden, who is the landowner and also owns the quarry and operates his company operates the building stone side of the business. He really has overall control. And what he would like to do, and he has made pathways to that. He has invited a number of people to the quarry to have a look around it, to explain what the operation is and where things will be and what the programme is going to be over the next 10 years. He admits that there has been quite a lot of expansion in that quarry over the last 10 years, which, you know, there will be. You know, they've invested in saw sheds and wash plants and it's all to make a better product, right? So basically we would, or I think I speak for Mr. Ogden and Mr. Whitelock, is they and their agents would like to open up a dialogue so that there are no longer any misrepresentations or misinterpretations of planning conditions or anything like that. And we'd like to set that meeting up as soon as possible. As a caveat, I don't think Mr. Ogden wants to be targeted and abused. And to be honest with you, he was quite upset after he went to a meeting a few weeks ago in the village, which was quite hostile. So that's, and we want to come back from that if we can.
Okay, that's useful to know. Looking at what the issues that have been raised by speakers so far, and judging from the comments within the report, would that sort of dialogue going forward extend to the location of the proposed filter press? As I understand, it's only at foundation stage, and its actual location seemed to be a bone of contention. And I'm sure colleagues will want to probably explore this further with questions to officers. But I mean, is there scope for that dialogue going forward? Do you think? I appreciate this is putting you on the spot, and you are not those two gentlemen, but just to give the panel some flavour of this.
The thing about it is that because there's a lagoon there and there are, the reserve of block stone is on the north side of the quarry. The filter press has to be as near as you can appreciate to pump water from somewhere with, 40% clay in it. To pump it can't be pumped very far. So we looked at an area where it could go. And that area, we actually looked at the landscape, and as Mr. Littlejohn has quite rightly done, he's gone out and done his own assessment, but we did an assessment also. We'd had a landscape report done before. So we did the assessment on the landscape. We've had an assessment on the dust and noise for the crushing operations, which will supply the sand plant. As you can appreciate, because the filter press and the sand plant are a wet operation, there are no emissions from that. The second thing is noise. We've had a comprehensive noise report undertaken for the quarry, including the filter press and the sand plant working together. And because they're in buildings and they're run electrolically and hydraulically, none of them, they don't make any noise. So basically the location where it is tucked into the face, in the base of the quarry, then it can't be seen from outside, and it certainly can't be seen from the houses in the village. Right? Now, I walk around the village on a regular basis, and I can't hear that quarry at all, to be quite honest with you. I would say that, wouldn't I? But I have been around with the planning officers as well, and they have not heard it. They can't hear things either. So, it's what I would say, it would be difficult to move it because of, from all the impact assessments we've had done, that is the best place for it to be, so it mitigates any emissions and any nuisance to the residents.
Question, but I'll leave it for now. Councillor Esselwood.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to these traffic movements in and out, the 110 in and the 110 out. Thank you. I'm getting a bit confused about these traffic movements in and out, because there seems to be lots of interpretations of this limit You've talked about them being, and you said while you were sat there, you referred to them as annual. Well, as far as I'm concerned, they're not annual; they're weekly. But you mentioned the figure as an annualized figure at one point as you've been speaking. People from where I'm sitting, people in the public gallery here are shaking their heads when these limits are talked about. So I'm concerned that we've got a limit on these movements of 110 in, 110 out, but they're being interpreted in lots of different ways and therefore exceeding the 110. And we've heard as well from the report and from officers that the water is now being added, that's coming in is being added on top of these limits, and these limits exceeded. So there's lots of different interpretations of this 110 in and 110 out, and whether they're weekly, annualized, or whatever they are. So I'd like you to definitively tell us what your understanding of that is and why they're not being stuck to, why you're exceeding these all the time.
Just a minute, John. Could we ask the officer to explain what this is to you, Councillor?
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Hazelwood. I think it might be more appropriate if Steve, because he has the condition in front of him here, so he can explain because don't forget there's a live enforcement case about these movements ongoing separate to the discussions of this application. So we are slightly going off track, but Steve could answer the question directly.
But we may have that, but I'd like to know what the interpretation is as well. Right.
That's absolutely fine. I'm just trying to give you both sides of the coin.
Okay, so I have the condition in front of me. It says no more than 220 heavy goods vehicles total trips, 110 in, 110 out, during any Monday to Saturday working period. So that's heavy goods vehicle. So it's not about it doesn't define different types of material. It just defines the HGV movement. It also says no more than 60, 30 in, 30 out on any one day during a working week, and no more than 1,000 tons of bulk fill and or aggregate shall be transported from the site per week unless otherwise agreed in writing with the local planning authority. So there is a bit of leeway there, but we haven't agreed anything in writing for obvious reasons while there's enforcement going on. But there is on a it's accepted that sometimes there's a campaign basis for increasing traffic movements for a short burst, and we would want to know exactly how long that we're going to take, what the routing strategy was, and what exactly the impacts were. But we haven't approved anything under that condition. So, but it is there, and that's basically the meat and potatoes of the condition, Councillor.
Thank you. Can I ask your interpretation of that then? Because it seems that we're getting different reports on the actual movement.
That's my interpretation exactly. That it is 110 wagons per week in and out, unless there is a opportunity to undertake other works. For instance, this site has actually been providing bulk fill to Calverley and down at on the flood relief scheme. And that's a campaign basis. Those discussions I've not been involved in, but I understand that Mr. Whitelock and his agent have been in discussion with the council in the past about it, and probably those discussions are taking place at this moment with this enforcement action. But my understanding is that on normal operations, it's 110 wagons in and 110 wagons out, unless there is a campaign for other materials where the council then must be liaised with, discussed with, and the routes where it's going to will be discussed.
But sorry, no question, but we've never agreed any of those. We've just heard that we've never agreed any of those campaigns. That's never been agreed. And also you've said yourself that the water that you're bringing in is on top of that 110 in, 110 out. So you're actually bringing
that, to be quite honest with you, because we were providing material that we were providing, there was a tanker with water. Yes, there was an interpretation that wasn't for that wasn't production of aggregate, which most limits and most vehicles are. That's what I'm saying. But this application that we've got before you will eradicate the need for the tanker movement. So there we are.
So you're exceeding that 110 in and out?
Not necessarily, no. Not every week. We're not. No, it depends. There's some weeks when it's only 30. You see, this time of year, as we can appreciate, you know, it doesn't get light well 8:30, and it finishes at it gets dark at 3:30. So you're not going to have many aggregates wagons running in the dark. But in the summer, you will. You'll get more. So that's why we're talking about the annualized movement.
But it's not an annualized target, it's a weekly target.
Yeah, I'm agreeing.
Okay. We will have it in writing and we'll go by that, councillor, at the end of the day, whatever decided. Could I leave that question there? Because I don't think you're going to get very far with it. Are you happy with that? Okay, Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks. I'm just going on to my colleague, Councillor Walshaw, regarding what you would do to take into consideration the objectors. So my question to you is regarding the hours that they raised. It's 2 extra hours on Saturday and an hour and a half on during the week. Would you be prepared to reduce that in order to you stated that there's a liaison committee that you'd like to re-establish. I'm sure things like that would come up.
Unfortunately, I don't have the planning conditions in front of me, which is from the 1996 Planning Permission, right? So what those hours reflect is that the quarry is able to work outside, producing material by crushing and screening, washing and whatever, until a time during the day. I can't, without having them in front of me, it's something like 1730 or 1800 hours. That planning permission also allows the continuation of the processing of material if it's inside a building or it's not being fed. In other words, to allow it to run to its end of its cycle. That is what is being proposed here. It's exactly the same as the saws running in the saw shed. There'll be nobody at work. The machine, the sand plant and the wash plant and the filter press will purely run to the end of their cycle, right? Now, I believe that, and Mr. Littlejohn can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that is until any time between 1800 hours and 2200 hours. But they're inside closed buildings with nobody else at work. So there is no activity. That's all I'm suggesting. We will obviously try most of the time to assess what material is being washed and when the filter press and the sand plant will complete their cycles, like they do for the saw sheds at the current time.
Can I just say, at this moment in time, it says within the quarry 7:30 to 5:30 weekdays and 8 till 1 p.m. on Saturday. And well, according to this, the proposed to condition hours is 7:30 to 7 p.m. weekdays and 8 to 3 p.m. on a Saturday. So that's where I'm getting the 3.5 extra hours, and I'm saying, you know, we've got the residents who are objecting to the extended hours to ask why can't you work within those set parameters, those hours?
We can work within the, we will work within those hours that are provided for working outside in the quarry, right? Which is what those times are. There are other times for materials to be processed within a building. And there's never been any complaints about the saws running on programme while 10 o'clock, because they're in a saw shed with the doors closed and everybody's gone home. And I think that's what Mr. Littlejohn is trying to not restrict the working on the sand plant and the filter press, because that would be the same sort of condition that would be in the for the other processes. But basically the quarry is closed down apart from those machines running. If you wish us not to work beyond those hours for the filter press and the sand plant, even though there are no impacts on the measurements we've taken in regard to noise, then all we can suggest is that we will do the utmost as we can. And obviously, as a committee, you are able to change those conditions if you feel uncomfortable with them.
Thank you. I'll ask Mr. Littlejohn.
Councillor Cartwright.
Sorry. The impression I'm getting is that Mr. Ogden, yourself, interpret and reinterpret the rules according to what benefits yourselves, rather than considering the regulations or what are the reasonable, or you might not think that, views of the residents who presumably want a quiet life to get on with things without having to spend time monitoring. Would you agree with that you're constantly reinterpreting according to what benefits yourselves rather than looking at the regulations?
No, I wouldn't agree with that, actually, because what the conditions on this and any other quarry within Leeds or any other quarry within West Yorkshire or the whole of England are quite clear. It's the interpretation of what that is. And as I say, at this present time, there's a difference in interpretation between what the residents believe that the quarry can do and what the quarry operator believes he can do. Right now, that's something that we have to discuss and get to some sort of agreement, whichever way. Right. We are aware that the residents monitor the site. This site is more monitored than any of the other 30 that I actually advise on. Right. So what I'm saying is we as the operators, and Mr. Ogden have to negotiate and discuss with the residents. But if I may be so bold, the residents interpret those conditions for their benefit also, right? To do. So at the end of the day, we have to get to a situation where we know quite clearly what the conditions are going to be. Now, Mr. Littlejohn has alluded in his report that there is, at the moment, a review of what they call a review of the old mining permissions, and that gathers up the planning permission from 1996, the planning permission from 2006, and the planning permission from 2016. And all those conditions are slightly different. And what we're able to do, Mr. Ogden and Mr. Whitelock, me, and any other agent that's involved, we will be able to negotiate with the council what conditions there are, and we'll be looking for conditions with the minerals team that are not ambiguous, quite clearly say what we can do, and then there'll be no misinterpretation.
So would you agree with the conditions outlined by Dr. Alderson, who spoke previously, of what the residents would like?
Well, as far as I'm aware, Dr. Alderson and a number of other residents have conveyed their thoughts to the council, and it's up to the minerals planning officer to write the conditions that he believes will control the operation.
Just a minute, John. Nikki?
I just want to give some advice of caution here. this is not a matter for the applicant to change his application before you. You've got the application before you with the hours, the red line, the operation before you. It's for you to decide that application as to whether you approve it, you wish to vary it, or apply certain conditions. It's not for you to discuss or negotiate with the applicant, or indeed members of the public, just so that I may draw some caution there.
Yes, I understand that. I was just wanting an opinion, really. I wasn't trying to negotiate outside of the usual parameters. I wouldn't want to do that because I know what the regulations for planning are, but thank you.
Where did Councillor Gotwell by saying the question that the can't remember his name suggested, would you happy with that? But in other words, he was asking him his opinion.
Are you happy for me to ask that question?
No, I don't. What I'm saying,
I would be cautious in you asking that question, Councillor. It's up to you when you've heard from officers and all the evidence and read the papers for you to decide thereafter what's appropriate for this planning application, applying your judgment.
Thank you. I'll leave it at that.
I do another question. My comments, I've got many questions, but some of it already asked. But from what I'm gathering from the floor of members, there's totally lack of communication with you and the community. And I'm sure if you had communicate more with the community, this wouldn't have stretched out. You'd come to some compromising. And as a chair and representing a ward, any project like this or any project, the community should be a part of it 50-50 with the discussion. And I was disappointed to hear that after the pandemic slowed down, there's no communication. I think that was very poor.
Liaison meetings couldn't obviously go on during the COVID and the actual the council.
It couldn't go on. I don't expect an answer. It couldn't go on during the COVID, but it's been a while now since
it has. That's correct.
And
to be quite honest with you, as I say, the operators, and in particular Mr. Ogden, have invited people to the quarry to have a look at it, and there have been people who have come to the quarry and then reported back to the village residents, right?
Okay.
Mr. Ogden has been to a couple of meetings, and then he's been to an open meeting a few weeks ago, and it was very, very hostile towards him. So what I'm trying to say is that, we're at a bit of an impasse at this present time, and I don't think it's all the residents of the village. So at the end of the day, what we're hoping to do is to improve those relations by having liaison meetings again. But I went to a meeting in 2014 with one of the mineral planning officers, and it was the same.
Way back, but in future, please communicate with the community.
We will do. We're quite happy to do that.
Okay, thank you for your time. Thank you. Questions finished. So we'll just go to officers. Any question for the officer? Right, let me get me hand up. I'll start it off with you, Councillor Campbell, and then keep your hands up, others, please.
Well, you were going to answer the question about hours, but while I've got you, I'll just stick a few more in. You did say that it wouldn't, the effect on traffic movements will be minimal. Can you tell us how minimal? And I'm assuming we were told that there were other potential locations. Has there been any discussion with the operator about alternative locations?
Thank you, Councillor. The maximum number of potential traffic movements would be 2 a day, which under enforcement proceeded.
Okay, two's easy. Let's stick with that.
All right.
Where we are with two.
Yeah, all right.
Now, I suppose the question the obviously knock-on question is, in effect, if it's 2 a day, that's let me work that out over multiply it by 5, 10. That's 12 over a week, isn't it? That's 12 over a week. So, are we saying that would have to be within the 110, or would it then become 122?
It would have to be within 110. Yeah, the other part to the question, other locations, that gets to the nub of the matter, really. I would have enjoyed to have that conversation, because it would probably have prevented me from having to come here. We were presented with a location, and that was the extent of the negotiation. And that's why we said, oh, well, I'd rather deal with it as a planning application then. Hours. Okay.
Your interpretation of the hours.
Okay. Just right, here we go. So Mr. Carlin was absolutely right. We've got 3 permissions, and those 3 permissions operate in different ways at different parts of the quarry. So we are reviewing the process and trying to get a coherent set of conditions. That's been ongoing for some time. The conditions pertaining to this particular part of the quarry, in terms of operation hours, it states the following: no operations other than maintenance work outside buildings constructed on the site shall be carried out except between 07:30 and 17:30 weekdays and 0800 and 12:30 Saturdays. So that does allow for plant to work inside buildings. And there's the 10 o'clock thing, I'm not sure where that comes from. It might be just from a previous agreement, but I've not found it in a condition. So that's basically what it is. So yeah, the saw sheds can operate beyond those times because they're within buildings. But those buildings would have to be closed.
Councillor Smith?
Sorry about that. It's just struck me. That's the current permission on the site for the operation that's on that part of the site that includes this particular place. Presumably, though, if we gave permission today, we could set our own hours conditions.
Yeah, that's what I intended to do with the proposed condition in the report.
All right, thank you.
Control the filter press plant. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. So excuse me, I'm not 100%. So firstly, why was there no site visit today? Because I think a site visit would have been useful. So that's one question to you. And another question, really. I'm going to go back on the building in Greenbelt, if I may. Now it says that extraction of minerals is an acceptable use. Does this qualify within that acceptable use, please? And then the third thing is, what negotiations have taken place with regards to the now redundant lagoon, and will it be rewilded, or will permissions be sought for the continuation of quarrying on that area, please?
Sorry, Chair, can I just answer the first part of Councillor Smith's question about the site visit? You'll all be aware that we do have a chair's brief before the reports are published, and we did discuss this. It's an operational quarry. We don't have the safety equipment that would have been required for you to have gone onto the site. But also, if you remember the photograph that was shown very early on, which showed the concrete silos that the thing's going to be sat on top of, you'll have noticed that there was quite a lot of water stroke sand mixed together, almost creating a quicksand-like material. Again, you would have had difficulty actually negotiating that. So we've had to rely on the photographs for those reasons, or we decided in terms of safety because we didn't have the correct safety equipment and the conditions. So I just thought I'd answer that one, and I'll let Steve answer the rest.
Thank you.
So in terms of the building in the green belt, minerals extraction is considered to be acceptable use within the green belt. And yes, this would form part of that. There's not an approval for a different use other than from the minerals approval that's already on the site. There's no other change of use. It's just for the minerals extraction.
Sorry, just a quick one on that. But there is another byproduct if we use this press. There's another byproduct. Does that then qualify?
I would say it does as a mineral product, yeah. Sorry, the lagoons, yeah. No negotiations taking place regarding the lagoon. Permission exists for extraction, and I believe that they intend to go below, and that's within their existing approval. So the only condition that I would impose is the one that I've put in the report, which is for it to be ceased immediately, and then for it to be removed within 12 months.
I think you've answered about the time, so I won't be asking about that. It said that that you've requested a landscaping scheme. Have that come forward? And also within the is it the conditions set out that they've got until 2042 to provide that, or to do the landscaping? So those were my question to you. And one question to the highway officer: are you happy with all these movements? And do know that it state that there's been some breach, etc. But can you give us some clarification with regards, because we're getting a bit muddled up. So it's 110 per week, or is it 30 per day? Or, so obviously we are aware that there's been quite a few conditions over the years. So everybody's getting confused with regards. Obviously the operator using the three different condition, 1996, 2016, etc. So can we have some clarification, please?
So with regards to the landscaping plan, one has been submitted and it's okay, it's acceptable in general terms. Certain details like numbers and timeframes and how it's going to be provided, having a bit more detail about the land raising, the bunds there. So I'd like to move that onto a condition so that I can negotiate further to get something that is both acceptable to the other side and to our side as well, because that's the way that it'll get properly implemented. So a bit of to and fro to go, but yeah, it will be there under that condition.
Okay. Yeah, just another thing I meant to ask with regards to permitted development. Can you just clear it up? Was there any permitted development allowed, or wasn't there? Because they start building believing that they had, and you're saying that they haven't. So where did they get the idea that they had permitted development rights?
I think that's just a difference of views. We don't consider that they had permitted development rights to do that, because we have a condition that requires prior approval, which is the condition that I put on the screen earlier on. So it's just a difference of opinion, really, I think.
Chair, sorry, you need to step back from your mic a bit, Steve, as well, sorry. If you remember, it was quite clear, wasn't it, from Mr. Claren, that there's different interpretations of things. I think when Councillor Garthwaite asked the question, I think the answer was a little bit confused, wasn't it, in terms of what they understood. It's not permitted development in terms of what you would with a householder application. It's the interpretation that they have of that particular condition that was read out earlier, that they think within that it allows them to do certain works, but we don't. So that's where that came from, if you don't mind me saying. And the landscapes theme, I'm going to wake Dan up at the top here. Can we go back to one of the cross sections? Because I just want to make a point to members, please. It was early on in the presentation. I can't remember which slide it was because I don't have the copies in front of me, but it was a cross section of the unit. If you can just get to that, please. Yeah.
But they don't have to implement it, do they, until 2042? Is that what it said?
No, there's two issues there, isn't there? I mean, one is the landscape scheme that's to be submitted as part of a condition on this. And I just wanted, I think it's before this one, Steve, or Dan, rather. Keep going. It's a section. No. Is it after? Sorry, it's the wrong way, Dan. My apologies. And then there's the restoration, which is 2042, Councillor Hamilton. That's the two. When the whole thing is put back, that's why there's thank you for that. See the bottom, in terms of the landscape scheme, can you see when Steve's talking about the bunds, and he mentioned that the cabin actually overtops the landscape or the hole that it sits in by about 5 meters. You can see an indication of the slope down to the main street in Hawksworth there. So the bunds and the planting would be at the very top of that raise. But the point I wanted to make here is that unless you're actually stood right on the boundary, which is at the top of the land there, because of the line of sight going up the hill, you wouldn't actually see the cabin, simply because of the topography of the site and the fact that it's sat down slightly. So yes, if you drew a straight line across, it overtops by 5 meters, but the only point you would get that view is you have to be stood right on the edge of the quarry. But to ameliorate that as best as it can, which it would do unless you were stood at the quarry edge, the intention is to raise the bund and put landscaping along as it's shown roughly in the area where that little green tree is shown. Does that help? Thank you. Sorry.
So just with regard to the 2042, that's a condition that was imposed by the Environment Act in 1995 for all quarries. So overall, there's a restoration scheme that's approved in terms of land levels, and that has to be achieved by 2042 according to the current legislation. This would be a separate condition. So to some extent it would be temporary because we don't know what's going to happen before 2042 with regard to other landscaping within the site.
In regards to highways, I think the conditions is very clear that there's a limit of 110 vehicles in and 110 vehicles out per week. But within there's a separate cap of you can go up to 60 on a given day, but it still has to sit within that 220 two-way trips in a given week.
So let me just get it in my.
On this application,
Yeah.
On this application, there's two scenarios presented to us. One where the pressed material stays on site, and one where it leaves site. Where it stays on site, there'd be no vehicular movements, obviously. Where it leaves site, what we're told is that there's 48 tons per day, which is 2 or 3 vehicles, depending on the size of the lorry. But you can offset that against the amount of water that comes in now. So if it's 2 vehicles, 2 lorry loads per day, that would be offset against 2 lorry loads of water coming in. per day. So there'd be a net impact of 0 trips.
Sorry again. It's very sorry, Chair. It's a difficult one. Is this so basically just for yourself, Councillor Hamilton? It has to sit within the 110, whatever. Yeah.
Councillor Anderson.
Another question, just the first one, right? If you're saying it would be permitted for them to have an activity inside a closed environment, is there the need for any extractor fans that would need to be on whilst that is taking place? In other words, if you're working in a confined space, you need to move air about. So is there not going to be extractor fans needing to be used outside of the hours, the additional hours that you said it would be permitted if they were carrying out the enclosed activity? Does that not mean there needs to be extractor fans of some description? I've got a whole list of other ones. So if you can answer that one, first of all, will there be need for some extraction fans to get dirt and air out of the internals of where that's taking place?
My understanding is no.
So you're saying you're accepting that these people are going to have particulates going around a room and there is no place for that particulate to go?
It goes through. It's a water process, so it goes through
Any
pipes.
process, I'm sorry, but any process has an effect. It's either water comes off, air comes off, something has got to come off, otherwise. And the engines, anything that drives it obviously has an output from it. It's maybe minimal. I'm not saying it's in it, but you're saying that there is no output. There is nothing coming from this process that's going to hang around in the air whatsoever.
No, I thought you were talking about extracted plant.
An additional activity, which you said is authorised in the extended hours, fine, I take that as read. So whilst these people are working in a plant, an industrial plant on site, you're saying there is no health and safety legislation that has to be put in place to ensure that the operatives have got a free flow of air. So in case there was anything that was in the air, to make sure that there is no filtration of any of the air, there is no extraction of any particulates that have come, because if it's taking it from the water, the chances are there might be something in the water, some contaminant of some description. I just don't believe.
Jonathan, do you want to comment on that, please?
Well, Steve probably knows more of the details, but my understanding was that it's not a manned building. It's a building to house plant, the filter press. So therefore, there wouldn't be necessarily a requirement for.
In that case, how do you know how many hours they're operating it? Unless there's a person on site, how do you know how long? We've been told there's going to be an extra couple of hours. So how do you know what time that they did actually stop it at that time? Who is controlling that process on the plant? Whether they're physically in the building or in a separate building, somebody must be doing it. Someone will have to check that the machinery hasn't got blocked up, etc., etc. Because if the machinery gets blocked up, someone has to go in and unblock it. And if you're dealing with water and you've got clay, that my brief knowledge of science would be that clay does tend to clog up things eventually. I'm sorry, I'll make my own value judgment on that, but I am not satisfied.
Sorry, Chair. Why was that of concern, Councillor Anderson? Because it helps us then to understand the question. So,
because if you're needing an extractor fan, that's going to be going all the time. We've heard that there isn't an additional noise problem in the additional hours. So if we go on what the officer has said, then there should be no additional noise being generated. That would be the conclusion to reach there. So fine, I was seeking proof, but also you've got health and safety as well that you need to look into, because if you are storing up, if there's nobody in the building and there is the potential of some substance, noxious or otherwise, being in the building, as soon as that building is opened up for the next lot of materials to go in, that could come out into the environment if it's been blocked up. If it's been blocked up, which clay will have a propensity to do if it's left for a while. Just basic science, as far as I'm concerned. It's not any great detailed knowledge.
Just to cover that, and Steve, feel free to jump in. But as it's been said by Jonathan, it's an unmanned building. So there isn't the need to have that extraction facility for a health and safety issue. Maintenance in any machinery, you'd be a lunatic, I think, to actually continue to maintain something whilst it was running. You would stop it. So again, in that particular point, it was a concern there. But I do understand the point about noise. But what Steve was saying, because it's an unmanned building, it doesn't need to have that sort of mechanical ventilation. And also the product is supplied, I think, by a conveyor. Is that correct?
The product comes, it comes out of the bottom of the building into the base, so it kind of slops out. But it's an easy question to resolve, Councillor Anderson, because we could put a condition on requiring details of any extraction,
Fine.
And I'm happy to do
I'll
that.
come to that. Well, this is my next question. Right, the conditions that we've put on in this at the moment are in a mess. What went wrong with the conditions we've put on beforehand? Because obviously the conditions we've put on beforehand have been so open to interpretation that anybody can come along and interpret it whichever way they want. So what lessons have you, as the officer who's going to put the new conditions on? Because I have great concerns that the conditions that are being put on aren't being put on rigidly enough to enable enforcement to take action. The way that they're being worded at the moment appears to give a valid, we might disagree with it, but the operators are being able to interpret it, and presumably they've been getting legal advice. So their legal advisors are saying, it's quite okay for you to do this, this, and this. You as the planning officer are saying, no, that wasn't what was meant by these conditions. It was meant to be this, this, and that. Then you've got enforcement who probably don't know who's right and who's wrong, to be quite frank, if anything, if past experience is anything to go on. So they've got nothing, and they're frustrating local members because they can't actually take any action. They'll be saying to them, well, we're going to negotiate. We're going to ask them to submit an application, and we will leave it up to the plans panel to make the decision. So what are we going to do? Have we got any powers that we can consolidate existing conditions and rewrite them so that they cannot then be interpreted one way or the other? And what reassurances can you give me that on this occasion, you are going to seek the views of legal department before you sign off the conditions to make sure that legal department are happy that there is sufficient strength behind them that if there is to be a breach in the future, immediate action can be taken, not, well, we'll negotiate for 6-7 months while we have a little conversation. Meanwhile, the residents have still got the problems. So it's, either there is or is not a breach, not, from there. So, well, what reassurances can you give me?
I can give you 100% reassurance that I can go to legal for advice. The one thing I would say, I think your point is perfectly fair, and it's the reason why we called in a review of conditions, which is known as a ROMP in the trade. And we'll be looking, and I've done these things before, and I'm quite honed into how conditions work, and especially from seeing conditions from the 90s, which tend to ramble on and don't work. It also relates to the initial legislation, which doesn't allow local authorities to impose certain restrictions on quarries without opening themselves up to a liability for compensation. So it's complex, and also just on your point of enforcement, I might be talking out of turn here, but all enforcement is essentially about negotiation from the start, and it's not just supposed to be about punishing a person for breaching a condition. So, yeah, but I accept
it's resident. One thing that upsets residents and elected members alike is when we raise an issue with enforcement, there is never a clear pathway set out by enforcement as to what can and cannot be achieved. And as a result of that, residents go through conditions and interpret it this way. Planning interpret it another way. Planning enforcement interprets it a different way. Legal department interpret different. The applicants interpret all differently. Now, we've no idea as basic members of the public who's right and who's wrong. We can only take the advice that's given to us. Councillors tend, we might not like it, go on the side of the officers. You know, we tend to agree with the interpretation given to us, even although we maybe have our doubts. Well, you know, so if we were to approve this today, I need greater assurance that the conditions will be worded in a more professional and with the possibility of enforcement action being taken if these problems occur again. Because the residents, none of us in this room, well, the residents across there and the elected members across there will have the problems. But once this has been signed off, nobody in here is going to be affected by this in any shape or form. It's these residents that are going to have to suffer if we get it wrong. Now, we were advised at a training course recently that we cannot negotiate, we cannot change an application. Our role is to either accept or reject the application before us, nothing else, not put any other balance of judgment on it. So if we're going to do it, if I'm going to accept this, I need a bit more assurance that the officers, when they come to do the conditions, are actually going to do something that means something to the residents out there. So we can move that one on, right? That's that one. The application discussions. You said, I think, I can't remember exactly what you said, but you said that you'd have liked to have been able to have discussed and debated things a bit more, and you might not have needed to have this planning application here today. So what options have you not been able to discuss that you think would be potential solutions to this? Because I'm not allowed to suggest it, but you can suggest how the application could be improved. I'm not allowed to come up with anything, so you could.
Is that a part of the application?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question, Councillor, in terms of what would remedy the application. Well, I think that's what you've got before you.
Well, no, the planner said that if he had been allowed, he would have been able to have had a conversation about some of the other areas of concern that we've got. So what I'm saying is, can he tell us what these other potential areas that you think might, because what I might end up doing is making a proposition that we defer this to enable officers to go back again and to look at other alternatives to see if there are any that can be brought forward and then brought back to us. But that's not me. It's this narrow, that your training course put us into this bind when we were not allowed to make certain comments, and you've already.
Can I just clarify?
And you've already corrected one of my colleagues who was trying to be helpful this afternoon.
Really, I think I'll defer to the officer in relation to clarify the point that he was trying to make in relation to rectifying the issues on site. But in relation to the training that you've been provided with, negotiation is absolutely right. That's not the remit of members. But having said that, if there are areas within this application and there are material issues which you consider are required that go to the heart of the operation, that is certainly something that you can make an amendment to and seek. That is the distinguishment here. It's not yes or no, Councillor. You're a very experienced councillor. All of you, in fact, all of you on the table are. You can distinguish between what's material, what's not, what goes to the heart of the application, and therefore needs to be added, removed, or such. So That's the comment that I'll make before I defer to my colleague.
Thanks. The negotiation I would have liked to have had would have been in relation to the actual location of the plant. However, I'm not saying that I wouldn't have been persuaded that this was the best possible place. And my recommendation is based on not necessarily that it's the best site or where I would like to have it, but it's in an approvable location, and really that's all I can look at. So I as my recommendation makes clear, I think it's approvable in that location. All I'm saying is I didn't have the discussions about why other locations wouldn't work for the operator.
To do a scrutiny inquiry a number of years ago on the Peck Hill quarry out in Kippax and Methley. Now, at that point, one of the breakdowns in the communication was because of the levels of expertise that were or were not being invited along. For example, the involvement of the Environment Agency, the involvement of environmental health and various other things. And it was your colleague, Louise White, that dealt with me in that one. What can we do to get the conditions put in place so that their liaison committee can operate in a more effective manner, so that it can actually add value, rather than what appeared to be the case, that the applicants at least did not feel it was a productive exercise? So what can you put on the table today in terms of the conditions that you can put in place in order to achieve a better liaison committee?
The conditions on this particular application would have to relate purely to the filter press. There is a condition requiring a liaison group meeting. So we can use that. I can't speak for the team. I'm no longer in the team. However, if all sides are agreeable to a liaison group meeting, then that can be set up. We've done it elsewhere, and we did it here.
In order to progress that, as far as we cannot condition it to enable that to occur. That's fine. That's fine. If that's what you tell me, then I've got to accept that.
I don't think so. It would have to be relevant to the filter press, wouldn't it?
No, you're absolutely right, Steve. The liaison condition already exists on the wider consent, as I understand it. That's just been confirmed. So you shouldn't be duplicating conditions that are already on the wider site. So what should happen now is enforcement or compliance should look at that condition and liaise with the site owners and operators and see how that's being operated, whether it needs varying, and try and trigger that so that it works appropriately.
Okay. Councillor Wilshaw.
Thanks, Chair. I was beginning to wonder if Councillor Anderson was being paid by the word in the Conservative group and their allowances today, but it was a good point raised by all. It's more of a comment and wanting to move things forward to be helpful, Chair, rather than further questions for officers, if that's okay. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, just a question, but very, very quick question. Thank God. How many liaison meetings have you been to as officers?
On this particular site? I think we had 3 a year, for 3 or 4 a year for about 3 years, I think. That's just off the top of my head. I've not got an exact number to hand.
So were minutes taken of those meetings?
Yeah, the operator took minutes, yeah.
Can those minutes be made available to future liaison meetings and maybe the residents so that they have a better understanding? Because it's all about communication.
In the future, yeah, that can happen, yeah.
Right, there's two ones. Do you want to come in, Councillor, as well before Councillor Walsh now?
I just wondered, given the strength of feeling and the apparent bad feeling that has been mentioned by various parties throughout this, whether some sort of independent chair at those liaison meetings might be a good idea, and indeed an independent minutes taker.
Yes.
So as to ensure that they're not in any way biased.
Chair, can I just, I'm sorry, I know that feelings are running high, but I'm not actually sure this is relevant to this planning application. We know that there is a liaison committee, and we know there is a planning condition that on the wider site that says there should be liaison committee meeting. I would drop the hint to the ward members to talk to planning enforcement and ask why these meetings are not taking place. We can't second guess who does what on one of those, and it's not part of this application, even though we strongly feel there actually ought to be talking to each other.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. I was just about to say that. Thank you. I'm going to move on to Councillor Walsh now. Go to comments.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to put it on record. That's the first time Councillor Haswood's ever let me speak before. So we've discussed this at length this afternoon. We've scribbled down a few points as to wanting to move us forward as to be helpful. So these are in no particular order, Chair, and they're sort of, if you like, proto conditions that could be finessed by the Chief Planning Officer into full conditions. I won't go over the Residents Liaison Committee. I don't really think we can amend a condition on another application. More's the pity. So can't go through that one. We did discuss here, clearly there's a lot of there's form with this site and its operations and its planning history. So we were suggesting, and I don't know if this is conditioned already, so forgive me if it is to officer colleagues, but we would suggest that if there are any PD rights still pertaining to the site, that those be removed, so that anything changing on the site has to come forward as an application. And I was looking at Nikki with a legal hat on. Is it possible that we could condition that for perhaps in the future, or would that be something that would be? No, I didn't think. Okay, it's worth a try. It's going well. This. We were thinking that can we condition that with respect to the filter press and its implications, there'd be no increase in the hours of operation from current? Yeah.
Into the planning officer, he's already set out a condition of hours of operation. Have you set that out, Steve? Could you clarify that?
There was a condition, but it did allow for wind down time. So the hours were different than the general operational hours, but it wasn't left completely open like the previous condition, which allowed things to go on inside buildings.
That's not quite as clear sounding as one would hope.
All I was going to say, Mr. Walshaw, sorry, Councillor Walshaw, is that, yeah, it's the first, isn't it? Councillor Walshaw, is that, yes, that's within your remit in terms of the condition about the hours of operation, if you don't agree. And it might be worthwhile if Steve read out what was proposed again, so members are aware. But just going back to the other thing, the question about removing PD rights, the PD rights is about the interpretation of a particular condition where they thought that they had permission to do certain development. So it doesn't have PD rights per se, but no, we couldn't go back and take PD rights off something that already existed. you got the answer about the pre-applications in the future. At the end of the day, you know, we've got an application in front of us, and whether there's been breaches of conditions, we have to deal with those separately through the enforcement case. So you can't actually second guess the intentions, morality, or interpretation of what a developer might do. Unfortunately, it'd be nice if you could, but there you go.
The hours of operation. The hours. The filter press shall not be operational before 07:30 or after 1900 on weekdays, and before 800 on Saturdays or after 1500 on Saturdays.
That's an increase.
Yeah, and I think that the issue that many of us have on the panel, Chair, is that represents an increase. And given the commentary from elected members and local residents, I think there's a feeling amongst panel members that.
Yeah, you simply say.
Colin, do you want to use your mic, mate?
Simply say 07:30 to 17:30 and 0800 to 1200 on Saturdays. Just say that's the condition we want there, number 11. Just say that.
I'd happily accept that, folks. Thank you, Colin. That's really helpful. Most appreciated. And then with regard to
many people speaking, I don't mind Councillor Campbell, but we just want to focus on one at a time, please. You know, Councillor Walsh put in his points. Councillor Campbell, okay, you correct it, which is okay, but everyone seems to jump in. Can one person speak?
Can I just Councillor, but before you move on, in relation to the amendment to the hours that you're seeking, could you clarify on what material basis you would be seeking that, having listened to the objectors, the applicant, and reading the papers before you?
It would be we wouldn't adversely impact the amenity of local residents by increased operation at a greenbelt location. Despite there being an established pattern of use, we think it's reasonable to accept the established pattern of use. We think it unreasonable to extend that pattern of use. Is that okay? I think that's very clear. Thanks, Nikki. Relating directly to that, then, in terms of the vehicle count, obviously, Councillor Hazelwood had a back and forth with the applicant regarding this in terms of numbers. We would like a strict interpretation of 110 in and 110 out on a weekly basis, Chair. Not we've got 10 in this week and 300 in the next, because market conditions are allowed in that. And we suggest that we want this condition. Again, we're cognizant of the location of the site, and we're cognizant that this is, if you like, an adherence to what's already set out. So that's that. That relates to that's a total vehicle movement, irrespective of what they're carrying, if that's possible, if that clarifies. And then the last one, Chair, would be just that there is concerns in the area about the visual impact, and we'd want a surety that there's, if you like, 100% coverage, that the chief plan officer can decide and be settled and be happy with, that the site is obscure for local residents. I think there's already the officers quite rightly set out quite a comprehensive program, and I think we're happy with that. We just need to make sure the chief plan officer is absolutely happy in this defer and delegate scenario. I think that's everything.
Sorry, Chair, Councillor Walshaw. We can't go back and alter the wording for the 110 in and 110 out, because that relates to a different application, not this. Because all we're saying is that the two trucks a day cake movement or whatever would have to be within that condition. We could add an informative that just reminds the applicant of that, but it relates to a condition or a previous permission. Regards the landscape, I'm understanding that you're accepting that what Steve had said previously about potentially further negotiations with the applicant about raising the bund and the density of the application on that boundary is really what you're referring to. Yeah. I would suggest, myself and other panel colleagues strongly feel that has to be to its fullest extent, Chair, so that local residents can be sure that they're not going to have any visual impact. And I accept your point about the movement. It's just really we want the applicant, the operator, to read the runes, as it were, and I'm sure local elected members will keep an eye on this. That they need to adhere to those vehicle numbers, including this additional vehicle numbers from the press.
Councillor Eswood, I've got you, Councillor Campbell.
With all due respect, Mr. Buller, I don't think putting a condition, putting a line in to remind the applicant of the 110 is going to work, quite frankly, because I think we all know they're interpreting it with their own, whatever time of year it is and whatever market conditions, they're annualising those hours. We know that. And I have great difficulty in agreeing this application without much more assurance that 110 a week, regardless of load, will be adhered to, because I really don't think a reminder is going to work.
Yeah, I think we're at slightly cross purposes here, because I did say very early on that there is an ongoing enforcement case about the interpretation of that particular condition of 110. So that is action that's already ongoing because we want to impose our interpretation of that condition. So that is actually happening. What we can't do on this is to go back and add a condition for 110 vehicles, because why would you want to do that on something that's supposedly going to do only 2? So that is happening. I think we are answering that question, to be fair. All I'm trying to suggest is, because that condition relates to another permission for the wider site, we can't go back and change the wording of that at this particular point on this application, but we are taking enforcement action to ensure that our interpretation is the one that's adhered to. And just a more general point, because there were some negative comments about enforcement. The one thing about enforcement is that actually Leeds City Council does take it very serious, and enforcement is a very difficult rules and regulations to go through and does take time. But at the end of the day, as I say, Leeds takes it very seriously. We've got a big enforcement team, but ultimately enforcement action is discretionary. Many authorities don't do it at all, but Leeds City Council does. So I just wanted to make that point, because there were some negative comments about enforcement, which I just thought would have been unjustified.
Campbell?
I think there's probably a whole university lecture on the planning enforcement on this site. I can't actually remember one with more enforcement cases either pending or covered. That said, the problem is, Chair, isn't it, that it's an existing use, and none of us can think of a reason for turning down the principle. I think that's the issue, isn't it? And so what we're trying to do is to ensure that the conditions that we put on are sufficiently robust to protect the environment of the area and the residents. And unfortunately, we have heard, both anecdotally and through the documentation, that perhaps there's been a somewhat flexible interpretation of planning permissions by the operator. And so I think what we need to do is, if we're giving permission for this, and I can't work out a reason why we shouldn't, we need to be absolutely rock solid certain that these conditions are unambiguous. Okay. Yeah, and so from my point of view, I look at that, and I think I look at condition number 1, which effectively tells us this is a retrospective application anyway. Condition number 2 seems to me to be unambiguous, as does condition 3 and 4. Condition 5 might be, in that it doesn't. Condition 8 of planning permission 150455, is that the vehicle number condition? Right. Yeah. Okay. So in actual fact, what we're saying there quite categorically is the condition for 110 in, 110 out is paramount. So in some ways that reminds the operator that the filter press house should be finished in dark green. I'm not sure we'd argue about that. I mean, we might do. I'm sure that somebody won't like dark green, but there we are. And 7 and 8, I think we haven't got an issue with the. And again, I think that's fairly unambiguous. Number 9 is slightly ambiguous, in my opinion, and so I would put a line in that which says, notwithstanding details shown on the approved plan, prior to use or within 6 weeks of the date of this permission, so that actually pins it down. They can't use it until we get a signed off landscaping agreement. Okay. as Councillor Walshaw says, I do have some concerns about the point you made, Mr. Butler, in relation to where can you see this thing from. So I just had a quick look on the Ordnance Survey map, and actually, though you may not be able to see it from the road, on the surrounding footpath network, you will see it. And so I think there is a case for making the bund bigger and the planting more intense, or thicker, I should say, so that actually you can't see any of this thing. And again, trees and item 10, I think, is a standard condition, which I'm sure that the residents will keep an eye on our behalf, because I wouldn't expect planning enforcement to go out and double check. Number 11, I think we've already agreed, haven't we, that the amenity of residents and the surrounding area, we think the hours of use, the hours of operation. Well, now this is the question, isn't it? What's the difference between operational and the hours of use? Okay, and my view is it's the hours of use we want to condition, not the operational hours of condition. So the hours of use is 7:30 to 17:30 and 8 till 12 on a Saturday, and that's in the interest of residential amenity. Okay, and I think item 12 is again a standard condition which is enforceable if we choose to do so. So I'm quite happy, notwithstanding my concerns at the somewhat cavalier attitude of the owner, that I think we can put conditions on which it will not cure the problem of the quarry. We have to be very, very clear about that. And we can't put conditions on now that will cure the problem of the quarry. But at least it puts some strict conditions around elements of it, which in the end, we might be able to pick up the rest at a later date. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Giovanni.
Thanks, Chair. Just to back up Councillor Campbell there on those hours of operation, or hours of use, would it be possible, because it's mentioned earlier in the report, that this extension in the times is to allow a full cycle to operate? Can we actually say in this condition that all operations must have ceased, all use must have ceased by that time, just to make it absolutely, yeah.
Condition. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry.
Steve. So there's no further comments and officers are quiet. So can I ask Steve to sum up, please? Nikki, did you want to come in?
No, I was just going to say, in relation to those points, if Steve could collect those points, and then I think it was Councillor Walshaw or Councillor Campbell that are amending the recommendation, and that be made at the appropriate time.
This is the bit I relish, he said. So I think basically most of the conditions I think we accepted, but right from the outset we will, before permission is issued, run them past legal services so they are as enforceable as they can be. I mean, all conditions can be interpreted, whatever you write, anything can be interpreted differently depending upon one's passion, I suppose, but we will run them past legal services. So I make that general point. We put the information about vehicle movements that refers them back to the original permission that has that 110 that's referred to, so it's in the face, for want of a better description. We understand that the landscape condition has to be its fullest extent on the southern boundary to effectively hide any views from across the valley because of the elevated nature of it. So Steve was already suggesting that he'd have discussions continuing with the applicant about the height of the bund on that on that southern boundary and the species of tree. So I think we've captured that. I'd also just like to add something else myself on condition 5 about the filter press housing shall be finished in a dark colour, just the wording to be agreed with officers prior to installation or operation rather. And then of course the hours of use was that basically you were suggesting the filter press shall not be in any use excepting between the hours which was 7 o'clock till 5 o'clock, which and was it 8 till 12, which took it back to the original hours of operation on the previous permissions. But yeah, I think that was everything.
Question about plans that Councillor Anderson mentioned, any extract machinery.
Oh, sorry, yeah, and an additional condition, sorry, I'd forgotten about that, which is about if there should be any extract vents or anything required, that we has to be agreed with the local authority.
Yeah.
So on that basis, then it's as the original recommendation, which was to approve in principle, defer and delegate to officers, but with these alterations to the conditions.
I'll move the recommendations as set out by Mr. Butler, Chair.
That's been carried.
Yeah, very quickly, the application has been approved in principle, subject to the alteration. Sorry. Application has been approved in principle, subject to the alterations that I'm not going to repeat.
Thank you. So that takes us to item 8. Next meeting will be the 19th of January. Can I take this opportunity to wish you all a lovely Christmas and happy, healthy New Year, and see you back here in January. Thank you all for your cooperation. Thank you.